People who know me, they know I got a long track record of being, or at least their perception of it, is that I am anti-religious, um, atheist, um, anti-Bible, anti-Christianity. And I understand why. I understand why a lot of people think that I am that way. I come off that way. I'm anti the norm. Uh, Normal stuff just doesn't do it for me. Regular religion, normal society, normal culture. I was never a person that fit in. I was never a person that agreed with the general idea of things, general population. And religion is just always at the top of most people's ideas, most people's reality. Not that most people, everybody isn't religious per se, but everybody has a general understanding of religion and God that works for them. And I'm no different in that respect. I end up being different because what everybody else just accepted as the normal thing to do, to think, to believe, to feel, never worked for me. It's just not. Clearly, you grew up in the United States, it's a Christian society. So you just tend to flock to whatever the prevailing Christian ideologies are. If I grew up in a Muslim society, I would still come off the same way. And it'd be a gang of Muslims saying, oh, he's anti-religious. Because, like I said, the norm never worked for me. So, in my own spiritual journey, especially when I dare say it probably happens no matter what age you are when you start to question spiritual values and teachings, but it's even more so when the younger you are, when you question the spiritual or the religious teachings of your environment, be it your family, your school, your friends, whatever. The younger you are, the more energetic you might be when you offer those questions and challenges. So for me, I started out early. I started out around 16 years old, questioning and challenging everything that I was told. So at that age comes a lot of vigor, to put it lightly. And that youthful energy, that vigor came off as aggressive. Nobody likes aggressive people. And it just it stuck with me. The aggressive challenge to authority, the aggressive challenge to the storyline and the narrative, is what made more sense to me. So around 16 years old, people telling me, you get told, everybody gets told the same stuff. You grow up as a child and your parents want you to go to church or a Bible study or something of those lines. And I was just always like, I don't want to go. I was always like, I don't believe that stuff. I wasn't the person that heard the story. I never heard any biblical story that made any sense to me. So, right from the start, people tell you about Jesus. I'm like, wait a minute, what? That don't sit right. So, my spiritual journey started relatively young, or at least for me, in my mind, it's young. There may be people who started their journey even younger than that. Some people, if you grow up in a politically or culturally conscious household, then you may not have even dealt with You may not have faced the same type of religious challenge in your mind. But as I said, first time I was told about God, I was in a questioning state of mind. First time I was told about Jesus, I was in a questioning and a doubtful state of mind. And the challenges, the doubts got stronger every time I had an encounter. And this is all before I had the opportunity to study something. So when I did start studying, the challenges just got stronger. The vigor behind the challenges got stronger. First book I read was, first real book I read was Elijah Muhammad's Message to the Black Man. And so that book sort of, like every page, simply just, it was like every page was answering the questions that I had. I had those questions before reading the book. I had those questions before hearing about, knowing about, finding out about, learning, discovering Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X, Louis Farrakhan. So when the book was given to me by my uncle, it was just, it was as if the book had came out of my own mind, because every chapter was like, yep, this is what I've been saying, this is what I've been thinking, this is why I don't believe in such and such. So that book, Elijah Muhammad, his writings, his teachings, simply gave voice to what was already in my mind. And so that sort of began the articulation of my spiritual journey. It gave me the vocabulary. It gave me the tools to keep on looking and searching and discovering and studying. And so over time, and it was like a singular situation, an isolated situation. It was just me. I read the book and then I wanted to read another book. But I wasn't in a situation where my peers were reading the book. I wasn't in a situation where my peers even wanted to read the book. If I made attempts to share such information, my peers did not want to hear it. And that's not throwing shade. It's just, that's what it was. I've always been a Lone Ranger type person. So the Lone Ranger on his studies, the Lone Ranger on his spiritual journey. And so after doing the deep dive with Elijah Muhammad's books and doing a deep dive with anything I could find on Malcolm X and doing a deep dive somehow in there, I went through my spiritual journey, included learning about the 5% Nation, and it included learning about Dr. York and the Ansadu Allah community. And I even, at one point, I tried to join the Nation of Gods and Earths. At one point, that lasted for a little bit, and then I moved on, and I tried to join the Ansadu Allah community. That lasted for a little bit. I did studying with both. And then, my spiritual journey just took me elsewhere. But all throughout that spiritual journey, I'm learning how to think, how to critique. And I'm learning more about the Bible. I'm reading the Bible. People think you're just an atheist and you don't even know what's in the Bible. And I'm just like, you don't have to be a Bible believer to know and understand the Bible. Now, maybe you have to be a believer in order to accept the information in the Bible as truth or fact. but you don't have to. But anyone can open up a book and read. Now, and for me, that's part of the whole spiritual fight, because I can read the book. It was never a question as to not wanting to read the book. It was a question as to not believing what's on the pages, and even more so, not even if there's been times, it's not even about whether or not I believe the words that are on the page. The real fight, the real challenge came. The real challenge came when you read something and you're unsure of what it means, so you go ask other people. Or B, your own self, you are absolutely sure what it means, and you talk about it with other people. With either of those situations, you're unsure what it means, and you go ask your parents or your pastor or your friends because they're religious or something along those lines. And their interpretation and explanation of it sounds just as inaccurate or insane to you as the words did when you first read them. So they come across and give you their understanding of it, and it just doesn't sit. So you keep searching and seeking. Or B, you read it, you think you know what it means. Or I won't even say you think you know what it means. You know what it means to you. And then in some way, shape, or form, either because you directly seek somebody out, or it just comes up indirectly in a conversation, and you hear someone else's interpretation, explanation, clarification, and it's like a double take, and you look at them like, how in the world could you get that from those words? So either way, either because you seek it out directly or indirectly, your understanding, my understanding, ends up being totally different from everyone else's. And so again, it just reaffirms the idea that that tradition doesn't work for me. Doesn't mean that I'm not spiritual. Doesn't mean that I'm not religious. Doesn't mean, oh, I'm gonna go to hell. It just means that tradition don't answer the questions in any way, shape, form that is satisfactory to me. It's not my truth, as people like to say nowadays. And so now, what you do with that can either help or hurt you. And in my case, it's helped in a lot of ways and it's hurt in a lot of ways. Like, for the most part, I'm still the Lone Ranger. I still have the Lone Ranger personality, mentality, configuration of my ideology and my being. But it's in part because the way I look at things, the way I receive information, the way I perceive information, it's just it always has been radically different from everyone else. And more than likely, it always will be radically different from everyone else's. And on this spiritual journey, I can say, yes, there were times when that difference, that distinction bothered me, but I got over that a long time ago. I've made friends and acquaintances because of my differences. I've lost friends and acquaintances because of my differences. So the total sum, it all comes out in the wash. it is what it is. But as to the spiritual journey, all anyone can do is go with what makes sense to them. We all were given a brain. We all were given a personality. We shaped our personality, but components of it was given to us by the universe. All you can do is run with it. You play the cards you was dealt. So the idea, the question was, so are you an atheist? I'm not an atheist, but I understand why a lot of people think I'm an atheist. And I will say, yeah, there's plenty of times when I certainly have an atheistic bent. I have atheistic tendencies, but I'm not an atheist. And I had to come to terms with it. I mean, there was a time when I walked around proudly proclaiming myself to be an atheist. But at least for me, and I would suspect that it's not just a me thing. I would suspect that plenty of people who've been on this type of a spiritual journey may have come to the same conclusion. So I'm like, yeah, I walked around proclaiming to be an atheist. But the more and more I studied and researched, the more and more I realized even my atheism was a reaction to the dominant society and a reaction to the knowledge at the table, a reaction to the vocabulary at the table. What do I mean by that? For instance, if you've never heard of agnosticism, and so you've only been given the choice, you're either a believer or you're an atheist, and you really, in your heart, your mind, dare I say in your soul, you really feel, you really know, well, you're not a believer. Even that, I'm not a believer, because what is the belief that is on the table? If you grow up in this country, and really, and I gotta keep saying this, it's not just about this country, it's any country, it's any culture. If you grow up in a Christian country, if you grow up in a Muslim country, if you grow up in a Hindu country, and the only choice you're given is belief in the book that we hold dear, or atheism, and the book that your culture holds dear just don't do it for you, well, you will tend to say, oh, okay, I could accept, I'm an atheist then. So that's what I mean when I say atheism. Yes, I walked around proudly proclaiming I'm an atheist. It gave me my badge, it gave me my label, it gave me my identity. But it did not totally sit, it did not totally found me, it didn't ground me, it didn't quite fit, but it was the best suit available. And then later I discovered agnosticism. So you can have a belief in something, you're allowed to have doubts in a belief of something. And so when that comes across, it's like, oh, so it's not that I'm an atheist. It's not that I have absolutely 0% faith in a so-called higher power. It's that I have some doubts about belief in a higher power. I have some questions about belief in a higher power. And to go even further, if the only belief that you're given, the only choice in belief that you're given is Christianity, or i.e. Jesus, or i.e. Bible, something along those lines, then again, it's like, okay, Well, I don't believe it. I don't believe. No, I do not accept the Lord Jesus Christ as my personal savior. Then you're an atheist. Okay, fine. Then I'm an atheist. Now, like I said, no one's giving you a choice of the matter. They're giving you a false choice, I should say. They're telling you it's either A or it's B. They're not even giving you the courtesy of saying there's also a letter D option. There's also a letter E option. There's also a letter F option. They're just saying A or B, pick one. Okay. Some people will pick A because that's what they believe. So I'm a Christian and I believe in Jesus. Some people will pick B because they're saying, well, I don't believe it. And other people will say, well, B's the best thing going until they discover something else. So when I discovered something else, it allowed me to reconsider everything I had went through. So I went from being a proud atheist to being a proud agnostic. And the journey continues. And as the journey continues, one of the things that always bothered me, the reason, like if I use the metaphor of it fitting, so I put on the clothes of atheism, and I felt more comfortable in those clothes than I did in the clothes of Christianity. And so in my mind, atheism fit, but it didn't really fit. It felt like it fit, but it felt like it was just a little off. Like if you go to the tailor and he just doesn't get your measurements quite right. It's almost perfect, but something is slightly off. So the clothes, the tailoring of atheism almost fit, and then agnosticism seemed to give me that extra inch that was missing. But it still didn't feel right. So yeah, and because I am a person that when something doesn't sit right, even if I try to ignore it, I'm not going to be able to. I'm always going to be in search. I'm a seeker of truth. So I'm always investigating. So even though I transformed from the proud atheist to the proud agnostic, something was still gnawing at me. Something was still whispering to me, keep going, keep searching. You're not finished. This is not quite right. So I continued searching. And eventually what I found was what we call today as traditional African religion. And so when I started to read about traditional African religions or traditional African spirituality, the suit seemed to grow even more upon me. And so, again, being the isolated individual, I didn't necessarily have a community to build with, so I built on my own. And I looked up everything I could. I read everything I could find. And again, it began to suit me even more. So I've gone on this spiritual journey from being the anti-Christian. Used to call myself the Antichrist. So from an anti-Christian to an anti-Bibleist. To some extent, okay, I'm not trying to piss off every human being that's in my cipher. So how do I alter my labels so that I'm not in constant war with people that's in my life that are important to me without compromising my own sense of values and truth. So, okay, I'm no longer an anti-Christ, but I am still anti-Bible. Love it or leave it alone. Um, the more you know, the better you are. I went from being an anti-Bibleist to an anti-indoctrinationist because of what I began to realize and learn is sometimes it's not about the book itself. It's about the authoritative figures who tell you what the book has to mean. And so in that school of thought, in that sea of knowledge, again, being filled with a rebellious spirit, I've never been the person that would allow someone to deliberately pull the wool over my eyes when I know better. You cannot piss on me and tell me it's rain. So the authoritative figures who say you have to believe it, and you have to believe this, and you have to believe that, and it has to be this way. Yeah, you can miss me with that. So when I try to temper my anti-Christian view, or not when I try to. So that's one way I tried to temper my anti-Christian view. But again, none of it, almost nothing related to the Bible ever really honestly made sense to me. So in one way, shape, or form, no matter how much I tried to amend my view and my position, in the grand scheme of things, nothing was ever going to work. I was not put on this earth to believe in that book. But I go from being the Antichrist, being the anti-Bibleist, being the anti-indoctrinationist, to the atheist, to the agnostic, to traditional African spirituality. And I've done a decent amount of studying of several traditional African traditions. And and I've spent time, I spent time under several different Islamic schools of thought as well. So the thing is, the spiritual part of life never allowed me to sit under one camp for too long. So it's like the universe would put me under a camp just long enough to learn a little bit, to expand my mind. And then when the universe said it's time to move, life just conspired to move me out of that camp. And thus far, the only camp that has remained constant for the longest period of time, and if not the longest period of time, then at least with the strongest devotion, would be under that umbrella that we call traditional African spirituality. It's the most open because it allows you to receive wisdom on its own. You know, if you're a Christian, you tend to be closed to wisdom from other practices. If you're a Muslim, it's a little bit different for Muslims because Islam does teach you to be open to several other traditions. But even Islam, while it does tell you to be open to other people of the book, you get into a huge battle about just that one phrase. Because if you say, well, what about other traditions outside of people of the book? Well, no. Nah, you got to close down on those. If it ain't people of the book, then those are the idolaters. And then you go right back into the you're going to hell syndrome. So like even with Islam, Islam teaches Muslims to be more open than Christians, I believe. But they still got that openness is only open to a certain level. And so, like I said, I spent time under the Islamic umbrella, and I was open. Actually, Islam helped me to some extent receive wisdom from the Bible or the Bible thumpers. And Islam helped me receive some wisdom from Judaism. But ultimately, all three traditions are like the bathwater. And in that metaphor, I'm the baby. So the bathwater is getting thrown out, not me, and not my spirit. So, and speaking of spirit, that's what I was trying to get to. The entire journey, the whole time, the idea is trying to learn and understand self from the spirit perspective. And while there are great amounts of knowledge that I acquired from all those different religious camps, the spirit was always still unsettled. And so it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't until I discovered traditional African spirituality in different paths. In Ifa, from the Yoruba peoples, in Odinani, from the Igbo peoples, and to a large extent from Kemetic thinking of Kemet, where most people just say ancient Egypt. Those three really not only opened me up to even greater bodies of knowledge, but they opened me up to a stronger sense of or understanding of spirituality. Ifa in particular showed me that no door is closed. Ifa showed me that no door is closed and life is not an either or, which is one of the biggest lessons. Christianity will tell you it's either this or that. Islam will tell you it's either this or that. Judaism will tell you it's either this or that. You're either with us or you're against us. You're either a believer or you're a sinner. And if you're a sinner, you're going to hell. Ifa tells you it's not that cut and dry. Kemetic science tells you it's not that cut and dry. When you deal with the scales of Ma'at, the idea of the individual going to quote unquote heaven, whether you believe in heaven or not, I'm not saying that I do, I'm not saying you should. I'm saying the teaching about heaven, it's not a either or. The teaching about heaven is if your good deeds can balance on the scale with your bad deeds. So if you did not do more harm than you did good, then you go to heaven. So that's not an either or. That tells you the door is open. The door for your blessing is always open. It teaches you that it's not as though you do one thing and that's it. The rest of your life is already damaged and doomed. So That's part of, and I'm not saying anybody can say, well, you just got it wrong. You don't understand. If Christianity lets that, yeah. All teachings, it's easy. Well, I mean, anybody can make the argument that Christianity is not an either or, but the devil is in the details. So what I mean by that is, if you make that argument, you got to plunge deep and have this grand religious discourse in order to get to that. In the general scheme of things, the basics, the ABCs of Judeo-Christian thought or Abrahamic thought is either or. And so the basic ABCs of Ifa is both. It's A and B. The basic fundamentals in Odinani, it's A and B. You can go left or right. Either way is right. Kemetic science, you can go left or right. Either one is right. It's up to you. So that openness, it's like that openness frees your mind. It frees your mind and allows you to think about all options. And it allows you to consider things that you wouldn't have considered if you were stuck on, well, I can't do this. I can't do this because if I do this, I'm going to go to hell or I'm going to be damned or whatever. So that part of the spiritual teaching, that's what hooked me, I guess, to some extent, as far as being a enthusiastic, scholastic seeker of truth and practitioner of African traditions over the Abrahamics. Now, as to whether or not I come off with certain people with this calm, wise, unconfrontational demeanor and disposition, time will tell. Oftentimes, though, and I get it and I understand it, oftentimes people perceive me, they come at me today with their perception of me 10 years ago. Now, I get it, I understand, because, like I said, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I've always been, if there was a conversation to be had about religion, spirituality, politics, cultural current affairs, especially back then, I've always been a very aggressive, shock jock-ish type of person. So once you have that encounter with me, first impressions last long. I get it. So I don't necessarily begrudge anyone, especially anyone from my past, who feels as though I'm just too much. I'm over the top. Too hard to get along with. Heathen, pagan, sinner, idolater. If that's how you feel, I get it. I understand that's how you feel. Because one, that was my personality back then. And two, not to sound arrogant, not to be offensive, but if your mind is just like where mine was, there's only two options. You're either a believer or you're an unbeliever. And the good book teaches that unbelievers are heathens, pagans, and doomed for hell. So even if I didn't come off in an aggressive manner, if we had religious exchanges, conversations, debates, and you were on the side of the believer and I was on the side of the unbeliever, and first impressions are lasting ones, you would have no choice but to view me in a negative light. And as long as you remain under the tutelage of A or B only, under the umbrella of this or that, then again, it wouldn't matter whether I came off aggressive or coy and charming. You're still going to walk away with the same impression. And it is what it is. Um, but I, like I said, I recognize my own path. I recognize my own sense of growth. And so with that, I know that I have altered many views. I have nuanced many views. I have evaluated, reanalyzed, reformulated, reconfigured many views. Though ironically, or I should say, maybe I should say it this way, I've dressed up my views in better clothing. I'm way more respectful, or at least I make a concerted effort to be way more respectful when it comes to these types of topics. But you know, if you say, yeah, well, I just need, make it plain, like Malcolm X said, just make it plain. I need the brass tacks of it. Do you believe in Jesus? And if you put it down like that, if all you're looking for is a yes or no, and if you're just trying to write one down on the column, you're gonna still have to put me in the unbeliever column, because I'm never gonna. Now, if you can't contemplate, if you can't receive, if you can't comprehend, if you can't deal with what is in your mind an unbeliever, well, that's not on me. I could say, yes, I am a believer. Well, do you believe in God? Yeah, I believe in God. Do you know that the word God don't really refer to the universe? Do you know that the word God is simply one term from one European language that was never intended to be referenced to the spiritual power of, or the spiritual higher power, or of the quote unquote most high, like a lot of Hebrew traditions might say? And so, and I'm not one to try and bomb on people with etymology, or etymological gotchas. Like a lot of people, especially in a debate, a lot of people, you know, they'll try to hold you to what, you know, etymology is great and it's useful. Like it's a fascinating body of knowledge to study. But like in a debate platform, if you try to use etymology, I mean, it's okay to use it because you want to score points or even win a debate. But outside of give me my points, if you're really trying to, you know, once you put the win and loss column down for a debate, if you're really trying to get to know people and understand people and build with people, then trying to beat somebody over the head with an etymological argument is an example of poor relationships, poor relationship building. It's just not that appropriate. But you know, now if we just want to build on some knowledge, like I said, no. If your concept, like I said, people have asked me, students have asked me, so do you believe in God? And I mean, if I want to play around a little bit, well, how do you define God? If I don't want to play around, if I want to keep this simple. Keep it simple, silly. Keep it simple, stupid. Okay, yes, I believe in God. Next question. Can we move on with the lesson? But if you really want to, if I want to pick your brain and I want you to be more open about things, then I would say, okay, well, I can tell you whether or not I believe in God. But if my concept of God is different from your concept of God, we're still not talking. We're not communicating. We're just exchanging words. We're exchanging sentences and paragraphs. I can say all day, I believe in God. But if my definition of God is, let me be silly for a moment. If my definition of God is money, but we don't go that far, we don't discuss my definition. We just discuss the term. Yes, I believe in God. And in your mind, okay, he seemed cool. Because I can only rock with people that believe in God. Yeah. Well, my definition of God is money, and your definition of God is spirit. You ain't got nowhere. You haven't learned anything. You're operating under a false assumption. And when the truth comes out, now you're going to be hurt. Or not even if hurt is the wrong way. You're going to think differently, feel differently. He lied to me. No, I didn't lie. We didn't get right. We weren't operating on the same page for our terms. So what does all of that mean? Back to this idea of etymology. I could tell somebody I believe in God, but again, if my concept and definition of God is different from yours, because especially if you're dealing with Christians. Now, many Christians say, do you believe in God? In their mind, God is Jesus. So if I say yes, in their mind, they're thinking consciously or subconsciously, okay, so he do believe in Jesus. He just got issues with the church. Well, that ain't necessarily true. The whole thing is, well, no, I don't believe in Jesus. I believe in God, but I don't believe in Jesus. I don't define God as Jesus. So I would either define God as, well, I would either jump on the etymology train and go into all of this Germanic language stuff about what God meant when they coined the term versus what other cultures said, for whatever reason, that's the word we're going to grab. Or I'd have to actually, we got to sit down and break bread on, because even if you say, if in your dictionary, God is defined as Jesus, then let me go one further. Who or what is Jesus? So, okay, if you say, well, Jesus is that person that lived back in, no. Nope, sorry, don't believe that. Now, somebody else might say, well, Jesus is love. Hey, I believe in that. I believe in love. Are we on the same page? I don't think so. So, it's not only trying to understand each other. It's the idea of understanding self. As far as what is spirituality, it's the idea of understanding self, understanding each other, and understanding whatever we consider the higher power. Whatever turn of phrases floats your boat. I might say the Most High. Somebody else might say Father, the Father that art in heaven. We're still talking about the same thing, and we're not talking about the same thing all at the same time. So, what is spirituality? Who is spiritual? Spirituality is your belief, and to some extent, to a lesser extent, I think spirituality is more about your belief than it is about your practices. But spirituality encompasses both your beliefs and your practices. So you can believe in the higher power, and you can practice your belief in a way that's entirely different from the next man. We both can believe in the higher power, and we can believe that the higher power has a special name, but we don't have to agree on what the special name is. And we don't have to agree on how to practice our belief, how to put our belief into practice. Some may believe that the way they show their spirituality is by going to church on Sundays. I do not. I might believe the way I show my belief is to sit underneath a tree in the middle of the woods and meditate. There is nothing wrong with either one. There is something wrong with believing yours is better than mine, or mine is better than yours. And so, even if you're dealing with spirituality, it doesn't mean that you're not going to deal with discrepancies, discrimination, and disrespect, and arguments, and beefs, and battles, and debates, etc., etc. So again, you have to just you got to find a way to get around the idea that everything is going to be formulated in a nice little neat package. Spirituality is just as complex as religion, and religion is